After 2 weeks of major protests on the streets of Iran, they have now shifted to universities as the new academic year starts. Hundreds of people have been arrested during unrest since the death in police custody of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in mid-September. At Sharif University of Technology in Tehran, dozens of students were detained after fighting with the security forces. At other top universities in the country's largest cities, students held rallies despite security forces trying to disperse them. The supreme leader accuses foreign powers of engineering the unrest to destabilize the country.
I openly state that the recent riots and unrest in Iran are schemes designed by the US, the usurping fake Zionist regime, their mercenaries, and for some treasonous Iranians abroad who helped them. These riots have been planned. If the death of this young girl didn't happen, they would have found another pretext to create chaos in the country and harm the country's security.
Ali Khamenei has said Mahsa Amini's death was heartbreaking for him too, but he criticized people's reactions before the result of any official investigation. Like Iran's supreme leader, the president and parliament speaker have also announced that a final report on Mahsa Amini's death will be released soon, and anyone found responsible will be held accountable. But many people are already questioning its credibility. Rasul Serdar, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Latest news, Iran. Headliner. Iran accuses Great Satan, U.S., of inciting chaos and terror. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi accused the United States President Joe Biden of inciting chaos after he expressed support for demonstrations against the death of Mahsa Amini, a woman who died in Iranian government custody nearly a month ago. Protests started in mid-September after Amini died following 3 days in the custody of Iran's morality police for allegedly violating the strict dress code for women. The remarks of the American president, who is inciting chaos, terror, and the destruction of another country, serve as a reminder of the eternal words of the founder of the Islamic Republic, who called America the Great Satan, Raisi said, referring to the late Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Raisi also said from a statement from the president's office, the enemy's plot must be countered by effective measures to resolve people's problems. Dozens of people have died in the protests. Most have been protests, but members of the security forces have also been killed. Hundreds of demonstrations have been seen and hundreds of protesters have been arrested. On Friday, Biden said that we stand with the citizens, the brave women of Iran. It stunned me what it awakened in Iran. It awakened something that I don't think will be quieted for a long time. Iranian Foreign Affairs spokesman Nasir Kamani said on Sunday that Iran is too strong for its will to be swayed by the influence of a politician tired of years of failure. We will together defend the importance of Iran. The U.S. issued no sanctions against Iranian officials on October 6th over what it called the violent suppression of protests, in which the Biden administration has issued new sanctions against Iranian officials during the violent suppression of protests following the death of Amini in police custody in Tehran. The penalties were announced on Thursday. Iran's Interior and Communications Ministers, Ahmad Vahidi and Isa Zenapir, as well as the head of the Iranian Cyber Police Force, Vahed Mohammed Nasir Majid, and 4 other security officials. Headliner, Iran reacts to fresh EU sanctions. Iran's foreign minister reacted on Monday to European Union sanctions levied on Tehran, calling them superfluous and an unconstructive act of miscalculation. Hossein Abdulrahman said on Twitter, quote, the EU today adopted further superfluous sanctions on Iranian persons. It is an unconstructive act out of miscalculation based on widespread disinformation. Riots and vandalism are not tolerated anywhere. Iran is no exception, end quote. EU foreign ministers added 11 Iranians and 4 institutions, including Iranian's morality police chief, to a travel ban and asset freeze list. That's the latest news, and now my thoughts. I find it to be highly hypocritical that the United States all of a sudden cares about women's rights in Iran for a country that has killed 1 million people in Iraq based on the war on terror lies and the procure of chemical and biological weapons that were blamed on Iraq and Al-Qaeda. No such information ever existed, and the United States went to war, killing over 1 million people. Need I remind you about the invasions of Syria, Pakistan, and of course, a US-led coup in Libya, all of which killed tens and tens of thousands of people in the process. Also, need I remind you that the United States was also behind the rendition and torture program by the CIA in foreign countries where these secret prisons called salt pits were located all throughout Eastern Europe and the Middle East, in the process maiming, torturing, and hurting hundreds and hundreds of people, in which most of these people had nothing to do with terrorism. And to keep it recent, to give you an example about women's rights, in 1978 in Afghanistan, the Nur-Taraki government initiated a series of reforms, including a radical modernization of the traditional Islamic civil law, especially marriage, aimed at uprooting feudalism in Afghan society. And between April 1978 and the Soviet intervention in December of 1979, many of these Pashtuns and religious civilians were thrown in prison. Some were even executed at the Pol-e-Charaki prison, including many village mullahs and headsmen. And the president of Afghanistan before it, Mohammed Daoud Khan, wanted to reform the country, in which Afghanistan saw a fine modernization and enjoyed Arab nationalism during the 1960s and 70s. It wasn't until the United States became involved when the Soviets wanted to end the coup, during which the Afghan Women's Council, which was an organization under the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, which provided social services to women, fighting against illiteracy, offering vocational training, in which many feared they would be killed by these mullahs that were suppressed by the Soviets. Now, when the outbreaks began between the communists and the religious sector of Afghanistan, and despite nominal Soviet efforts to advance women's rights, they still faced intense levels of discrimination and violence against many of these mullahs and religious fanatics, which posed a very small percentage of places like Kabul. There's been many types of conspiracies involving the Soviets abusing women during the invasion of Kabul in 1979. Even though that may have been true sporadically, The U.S. propagandized this, stating that the Soviets were indeed raping and pillaging women in Afghanistan. With the U.S. intervention, including supplying hundreds of millions and weapons aid to these religious fanatics that were coming from all over the world to expel the Soviets, the Taliban took over the country, no thanks to the Pakistan and its inter-service intelligence agency, the ISI, who then took control of the country and began to defer women as second-class citizens. I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that what I just stated is not conspiracy. It is that for the public record. And I could even make the argument that that's what happened in Iraq in 2003 with the liquidation of the Ba'athist military and police through L. Paul Bremer, the Iraqi provisional leader under Iraqi Provisional Order number 1 and number 2, which destroyed all types of order in the country, which led to total anarchy and also to future civil wars between the Sunni and Shia sects in Iraq, which saw a rise of the Sunni Islamic groups, which also defamed and debased women in the country, which didn't happen under the Ba'athist regime. So thanks to U.S. intervention in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, Syria and Libya, countries that didn't have an Islamist problem, nor the debasement of women, all of a sudden, these countries that had the hallmarks of U.S. interventionism are now suffering under Sunni jihadist ghouls that at times are funded and trained by the United States intelligence services, mainly the CIA. The hypocrisy of the United States knows no bounds. And I say that in all honesty and without any prejudice whatsoever. And that is the reason why I will continue to speak out against the constant crimes and abuses of the United States federal government.